chums, and welcome to another Robert Ross's Comedy Greats. Now today, Robert, we're going to be talking about one of your favourites. I know we always say this, but one of your...
I've got lots of favourites, but yeah, this man is up there amongst my top sort of 3 or 4, I should think, yeah.
So we're going to be talking about Mr. Anthony Hancock.
Hey!
And you've now joined us for Hancock's Half Hour.
Hancock's Half Hour. Yeah, it's been gorgeous because we've been watching the TV episodes of Hancock's Half Hour in the order they survive, and you've been seeing them for the first time, which has been gorgeous for me because they've been part of my lexicon, those scripts, since I was a child, pretty much. So yeah. Tony Hancock, or as Galton and Simpson dubbed him, Anthony Aloysius St. John Hancock in the scripts. But,
was that his middle name?
It wasn't his real name.
No. I thought there might be a reason.
No, it's just they tapped into his pomposity and his affectations. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. So, how did he get started? Let's start at the beginning of his life.
Well, okay. How far do you want to go back? He's born in Birmingham,
okay.
And the family moved down to Bournemouth in Hampshire when he was about 3, I think, tot anyway. And he studied at Bradfield College in Berkshire, who I did a lovely thing with Liz Fraser in 2018, which marked, 50 years since Tony died. We did an open day at Bradfield College, his old school, which he was there for a few short terms. He was expelled, I think, or he was a naughty boy. We liked playing cricket there, and they did a lovely plaque unveiling to Tony there. Basically, it was the war, like a lot of the generation. He was born in 1924, so like a lot of that generation, he went into the services, and his love of entertainment. He failed an audition for ENSA. Every night something awful, but ENSA Entertainment, the corporation that toured the Middle East and Far East and entertained the troops. But he did get in with Ralph Reeder, that was the Royal Air Force gang shows, alongside people like Peter Sellers and Dick Henry. Those sort of people did the Ralph Reeder gang shows. So that was Tony Hancock's sort of first foray into not professional entertainment, but sort of performing for his fellow military people, and he would do sort of patter and impersonations and a song and just the usual sort of variety comedian banter, really.
Okay. And Bradfield College, I know you did some work for them back in 2020.
I did, yeah, which was lovely. Yeah. Their drama group. I was asked to do some little introductions. They did, I think, 6. Radio and TV episodes, and I put them into context, but like what we're doing now, yeah, their students reenacted these lovely old Ray Galton and Alan Simpson scripts, and the chap playing Tony Hancock was brilliant. I thought, because the scripts work obviously as great scripts. Paul Merton did a load, not just Hancock scripts, but all sorts of Galton and Simpson scripts, and he put his own twist on it. But the chap, the young student at Bradfield, did a really good Tony Hancock impersonation. So it was a delicious listen to those. Really, it was fun.
Okay, brilliant. So obviously I know of Tony Hancock starting at the beginning on radio. So how did that come about?
Okay, well, like a lot of those comedians coming back from when they were demobbed from the war, they just played the variety halls, music halls, and just worked their way up the bill, really. And it's interesting watching the Hancock's Half Hours because him and Sid James as a team on those episodes, they do sort of tap into their own past quite a lot of the time. So there was an episode I think we watched just recently, the Spanish interlude episode, where Sid is Tony's agent trying to get him work and just failing. I won't spoil it, but failing miserably, or getting him really mundane acting work. But Tony sort of brings out his scrapbook of cuttings, and he references, the good old days, remember those workers' playtimes I used to do? Well, he did do workers' playtime. So Galton and Simpson would tap into what Hancock had done and what Sid had done to an extent. So the radio sort of showcases for those great sort of variety comedians, variety bandbox, workers' playtime, those sort of things. Frankie Howerd did that, and all Peter Sellers, all those people that were coming back from the war, the young pretenders really. were doing those sort of radio shows, and Hancock just, you know, worked his way up, and the sort of pivotal show that he did was 1951, which was called Happy Go Lucky, and that was the first sort of major radio exposure for Ray Galton and Alan Simpson. And there was a little segment on Happy Go Lucky. He wasn't a star of it. It was a comedian called Derek Roy was the star of it. But Hancock was in a little segment called Eager Beavers. It was like a sort of Boy Scouts thing. Graham Stark was in it, and Peter Butterworth, and Dick Henry, and all these people. But Tony was the sort of the leader of this scout outfit. And Galton and Simpson wrote those. And they became very popular. And then, you know, as fate would have it, the BBC commissioned Hancock's Half Hour to showcase Tony, and Galton and Simpson wrote it. So that was 1954, November 1954, that was launched, and it became huge. And I think it's also quite easy to forget that the radio show was also running concurrently with the TV show. So the TV show kicked into 1956, but what we're watching at the moment, we're just up to series 5. That was going out at the same time as the last series of radio shows. So you could, you know, as millions of people did, you could watch Hancock and Sid on telly, and then a few days later you could tune into radio, the Light programme, and listen to Hancock and Sid on radio.
So just to pick up on Galton and Simpson, because I think I pointed out to you that I was like, oh, why were they known as Simpson and Galton? Yes, because obviously now we know them as Galton and Simpson and all their wonderful work, especially with Steptoe. Yeah. So what happened? Why was there a switch?
I knew them really well, and I asked Alan that one day, because it was and also importantly, they get their photograph at the end of the episodes.
Yes.
Which, my gosh, that was unheard of to get the writers. And they had good agents, Tesla Vance particularly, who got them Galton and Simpson's Steptoe and Son, or Galton and Simpson's Hancock on the BBC merchandise that came out after the shows obviously aired, you know, later on the records, and then much later the DVDs and videos, etc. But they got their photographs, yeah. So it was Alan Simpson and Ray Galton originally, and I meant, because there must have been a point. I think Alan forgot. I think it was probably, we might see it. I think it was towards the end of Hancock. Certainly Steptoe, I think, is Galton and Simpson, but I must check that. But they shifted at some point in the 1960s.
I have a sneaky feeling, and maybe our viewers will know the answer to this, so if you do, please put a comment in the box below.
Yeah, pull me up if I've got it wrong. Go on. It's all off the cuff, this. I don't know what's coming next.
We don't plan these things, so if we make a mistake, we apologise, you know. But I have a feeling at this very start, the very, very start, maybe even the pilot episode of Steptoe and Son, it's round the other way.
Simpson, is it Simpson and Galton? Maybe it is, yeah. Anyway,
sorry, I've put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. No, I should know this, but it was certainly around that time. And I remember asking Alan, and he said, you know, Rob, I got half the money. I didn't care what the bidding was, you know. So I think it just sounds. I think Alan says that it sounded better. Galton and Simpson had a better ring to it than Simpson and Galton. It does, doesn't it?
It does.
Galton and Simpson sounds like a double act somehow, but that's how it stuck. But yeah, these early ones, and Alan's photograph is above Ray's. And Ray's the one with the beard, but they both had beards towards the end.
Well, actually, let's just pick up on the credits. So following on from the writers being in the credits, one thing I did want to pick up on is the animation for the credits, which are great, but I think what's so distinctive about them is the theme tune.
Yeah, the credits are great. The cartoons are lovely, because it's obviously you get you get Tony and Sid in the early days, and but that tune was composed by a guy called Wally Stott. And Wally Stott is a fascinating person if you Google Wally Stott. But the tune, actually, if you're watching ever Talking Pictures TV, which I know a lot of people love Talking Pictures TV, us included, there's a 1950s film called Will Any Gentleman, which Wally Stott also composed the tune to. George Cole stars in that, and John Pertwee and William Hartnell were in it in a scene together for Doctor Who fans, 20 years before the Three Doctors. And Wally Stott wrote the music for that film, and it's very similar to the da-da-da-da-da-da Hancock theme. So that's obviously where he pulled it out of his bottom drawer and reworked it a bit to do that. But no, the credits are gorgeous, yeah.
Was it the same on the radio show?
Yeah, absolutely, same theme. Yeah, I have to broadcast you some radio shows, yeah, because there's some brilliant episodes there. But it's funny, because a lot of people, a lot of academics and fans think that Tony is best on radio, and he's a brilliant radio comic. There's an episode called Sunday Afternoon at Home, which is probably the definitive. It's probably one of my favourite half hours of any comedy show. And he touches genius because he gets laughs with silence on radio. And I can't explain how I'm getting goosebumps now. I can't explain how he does it, but there's moments when you can almost hear his brain working, and nothing is said, and it's actually empty air, but people are laughing at it, and you laugh at it because it's so funny, because you can hear his cogs turning. It's brilliant. But I think he's a superb television comedian too, because when you have those silences and you see that mobile face that always looks so much older than his years. I mean, we're watching him now, he's only in his mid-30s in these episodes.
I was going to ask about his age, because he appears much older.
Absolutely. Well, I think everybody was older in the 50s, didn't they? I think, seriously though, joking apart, I think having gone through a war certainly aged a generation.
Yeah.
But the way people dressed in the 50s just looked older too, didn't it? He does look older, but he's such a brilliant comedy mind. But there's episodes, there's one coming up which is my all-time favourite episode, which is The Missing Page, when they're trying to think of a murderer in a book that they've both read, Sid and him have read. And you can see him again trying to think it through, but there's no dialogue, it's just his face. But his face is so funny, he's got a brilliant clown face.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, and I know you've got something to show us, is the sort of merchandise of the day, which was a vinyl.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't of the day. There were records released when Tony was alive, which he also did little specially written introductions for, which I've got every single colour permutation of Hancock record. I remember you asking me once, can I get you some Hancock vinyl? No, I've got them all. But the one I always, in these shows, always try and pull out something from the Comedy Cottage archive, and this is actually from my late dad's collection. This was released. This is in pristine nick, and I just realised this is nearly 50 years old now. This was 1973, so Tony had been dead 5 years when this came out.
I hope you can all see it. Just hold it up. So it says highlights from the BBC's memorable series. Ooh. Hancock's Half Hour by Ray Galton and Alan Simpson.
There you go. You see, they swept by that time. Look, yeah.
With Sid James, Kenneth Williams, Hattie Jakes, and Bill Kerr.
Bill Kerr, the Australian from Wagga Wagga, and they were all alive at that point. Of course, you see, Sid died 3 years later after this came out, and Kenneth and Hattie were gone in the next 15 years, and Bill lived on forever and ever. Bless him. But yeah, this. There you go. You can lovely gatefold sleeve there. You probably all got this. If you're fans of Hancock, you've got this, but. This was how I first heard him. My dad would, and Galton and Simpson, and they are both with beards, in 1973 did the introduction there. Look, and this is just extracts from the radio show, so they weren't whole episodes. Right. But that's how I first heard it. My dad, bless him, illegally. They would repeat the Hancock's Half Hours and the Goon Show and the Navy Lark and Round the Horn on Sunday afternoons, I think. In the 70s, early 70s, maybe the late 60s, certainly the 70s, I think. What was it called? Was it Classic Hancock? They did a series, and they repeated all these old wonderful 50s radio shows that he loved, when he was in his 20s. So he would take them on reel to reel, which I still have at in my mum's loft, I think. And he would play these recordings, and I just fell in love with the voices. I wrote one. They're all dead at this point. Well, I mean, most of them. I wrote one when I was about 11 or 12, I think. It's sort of like a Hancock's Half Hour script.
What was it about?
I can't remember now. I think it was a rip-off of Sunday Afternoon at Home, actually, just them sat around talking. Because that's what it was. I mean, it precursed all that sort of the royal family and all those sort of things of just people, till death us do part. Just people sat in the front room chatting. And that's when you watch the Hancock and Sid-centric TV episodes. It's the blueprint for all those sort of what I call sitcoms, any sitcom with a settee in it, like Terry and June or anything like that.
Like us, we're
like us, exactly. Yeah. Well, but this is why Alan and Ray they wrote. They were two people in a room. One was at a typewriter, one was pacing up and down. Alan was usually typing and Ray was pacing, and they would write like that. They wouldn't write independently and sort of join them together. They would write as a team, the two of them, two brains as one. And that's why so many of their great episodes are just two people talking, be it Hancock and Sid or Steptoe and Son, or lots of the comedy playhouses go down that path of duologues. But the dialogue is so. It's just but the dialogue is just so rich. I mean, they're still the most quotable. I still think they're the greatest TV writers, no mind comedy writers, and just the greatest TV writers because their dialogue is just so sayable and so natural, and to me, when I watch their stuff, it doesn't seem like it's a rehearsed piece of work. It just seems like two people talking, and this is the best thing you can ever get to as dialogue.
Did Tony Hancock ever try and get in on sort of putting in lines or wanted to write?
I think he justifiably knew how good Golden and Simpson were, but they send it up. I mean, you know, it's funny. He did a thing years later, 1966, to the Festival Hall. Unwisely, I suppose, with hindsight, but it's the first gallop through is brilliant, and then he just goes back onto all his old stuff he used to do in the 40s, doing the Charles Lawton impersonations, you know, Hunchback of Notre Dame, and which he does in the TV shows, Robert Newton, Treasure Island. They sort of send him up. He's still doing Maurice Chevalier. We'll show a clip in a minute, but so all these impersonations they would drop in. So that was his act pretty much. But like I say, they spotted this arrogance about the man, or this pomposity about him, and put that in the script and just heightened it, and that's why it works so well. You're seeing a monstrous version of the real Tony Hancock, I think.
It's interesting, and I think you're right. It is a blueprint because we all loved an underdog. Like nothing ever quite in the TV show, at least that I've seen. You know, nothing ever quite comes off, and you see that the same in Steptoe and Son. That's repeated, and then even in sort of more contemporary things like Only Fools and Horses. Yeah. If that is now contemporary, I don't know.
40 years of them counting, but no. but John Sullivan was a huge admirer of Golden and Simpson. Everybody was an admirer of Golden and Simpson. Johnny Spate, and who wrote Alf Garnett, and all those people. So yeah, absolutely. But the British sitcom is very intrinsically built around a loser. We love losers. We're not fond of winners really. We like sending things up. You know, we don't like people to get too above their station, and that's what Hancock was good at. And Eric Sykes could write really well for Tony Hancock. He would lift him up and lift him up. The higher he gets, the further he can fall. So when he's got, you know, all that stuff about him going off to play Shakespeare. There's actually the very last episode of the radio series, The Impersonator, when he is trying to be a serious actor, and Sid's all about, you know, get the red nose and the big shoes on and get out and earn some loot, you know, all that sort of thing. Sid's always the one putting him down, and Hancock wants to rise above just being a variety clown and be Laurence Olivier, as you would call him, Laurence Olivier. So that's that. You know, you build him up, and then you see him doing, I don't know, Richard III in some awful rep company in Giggleswick or whatever it was in the show.
As a pirate,
indeed. Well, doing the Robert Newton, exactly. Yeah, he does the impersonation of Robert Newton as Long John Silver doing Shakespeare. Yeah, that was his act pretty much, you know. And he would do like I say, it's part of my lexicon. I quote it all the time. I drop stuff in, and I know lots of my mates do that. There's a phrase he uses. That's one for the teenagers. When he would do an impersonation of George Arliss, who was the Iron Duke. He was a real classical trained actor, but played all the sort of heavy parts. I suppose he was the I don't know, who's the equivalent of today's who would play all those sort of parts. Ian McKellen, I suppose, or Kenneth Branagh back in the day. But he would play the serious film parts, and he was this wonderfully grand actor. And he had I can do it. I've got to do a profile. It's like that. And he would say, what do you mean never heard of him? He's only been dead 40 years and all that. And he would send his own act up as out of date. But that's what he did. But people loved him. I mean, you know, we've not touched on how horrendously popular he was. It would cliche now, but it would empty pubs. The TV shows we're watching would empty pubs. You know, because it was millions of people, and they just loved him.
I love as well that, you know, I think what the television show highlights, which probably is what you're saying about the long pauses in the radio show, is where he might muff a line, or he might just realise this is really funny, and he's trying to keep a straight face.
That's some of my favourite bits.
And of course you've got Sid James, who, you know, I mean, I turned to you the other night when we were watching this and said, gosh, what a wonderful actor, because he really kept in character. Yeah. So how did they meet?
Well, he kept a straight face. There are times when he didn't keep a straight face. Because don't forget, it started as a live show.
Yes.
So a lot of them are obviously lost because it went out live and they weren't tele-recorded and kept, alas. But that was that. And thank goodness for Hancock being so sort of not a fan of live television that he actually started insisting they did record them, because there are a few of the live ones still knocking about. But most of the ones we have are because they're tele-recorded and were stored away. I mean, that wasn't a guarantee of them surviving, because a lot of tele-recorded stuff has been wiped, but most of the Hancocks that were recorded are still with us, thankfully. But yeah, I mean, there's one of my favourite episodes. I love them all, but the Two Murderers, where Sid's trying to get some money and Hancock's been counting his hidden loot, and Sid's trying to get money to do Fish and Chippo, the East Cheam Fish and Chip Emporium. And I won't spoil it again, but basically each of them thinks they're trying to kill the other one. But he comes in and he does this, Sid does a line muff, which is really unusual, as you say. And Hancock has this great line, says, I still don't know what you were on about. He goes, say it again, and Sid sort of laughs, and he has that Sid laugh, which isn't the overblown carry on Sid laugh. He had a very soft sort of laugh, and when you hear him do that little laugh, you know he's lost it and he's laughing at what Hancock's been doing. But usually 99% of the time he's dead straight. They met because they met on a film called Orders are Orders originally, but Sid, again, there's an episode about the competitions when he's applying for all the competitions and he wins a night out with Jay Mansfield. You know?
Yeah.
And the payoff line is that, you know, it's Sid has to sit because Jane's obviously busy and doesn't want to meet with Tony Hancock, and they couldn't afford Jay Mansfield on BBC budgets. But Sid's there, and he said, "What do you mean? I'm a film star." So he makes reference, because Sid was making films all the time, and Hancock wasn't at that point. But Hancock's very first film, and Sid's 101st or whatever it was a lot of money as that, but he'd certainly been making films for the previous 10 years or so, just under 10 years. Was Orders are Orders, which was a quite ramshackle military comedy, introducing Tony Hancock on film. Sid's playing Ed Wagenmeyer, this American film director, and this American film crew making this really crummy science fiction, sort of Ed Wood Jr. sort of style sci-fi film. They bowl up to this army camp where Hancock is the conductor of the band, the army band. And that's when they met, and they seemed to get on really well. And Hancock went on record as saying later on, years later, that Sid, being so proficient at making films, he would say where to stand for the like we're doing now, where to get the best shots and all that, and he would advise him. And then fast forward not very long, a few months after that, it was delayed release, so I think it was released in early 55. They'd already started doing the radio shows, but they shot it in early 54. So the end of 54, they started doing Hancock's Half Hour. We'll go into this on the Sid James show, but the way that Galton and Simpson found Sid James was a long story. But they wanted this guy to play this sort of this crook, really, this sort of like petty criminal who was Hancock's mate.
Which in the first few episodes, he's always being portrayed.
He's a bit dodgy. Well, on the radio show, that's what he was always getting collared by the police and stuff. And if the door knocked, he would be hide under the table in case it was a copper, that sort of thing. So that was, but he was playing those sort of parts on film. So he was this sort of hoodlum character. He occasionally played a police desk sergeant, but mostly he was like sort of confidence trickster or petty crook, or, you know, all these sort of characters. So they wanted an actor to play that, quite a straight part really, for Hancock to bounce against. And Kenneth Williams was in there playing various eccentric characters. There's jelly all over my Rembrandt in the first episode and all that, and then he would play Snide, you know, sort of the whining character that he plays in the Alpine Holiday on telly, the sole surviving, as far as you know, telly episode that Kenneth's in. And Bill Kerr, who got steadily more stupid and moronic as the radio shows went on. Brilliant comedian, Bill Kerr. I'm only here for 4 minutes, but Sid was the one thing that Sid didn't like. And Galton and Simpson couldn't quite believe it because he was so established as a stage actor as well. He didn't like a live audience for a radio show for some reason. He didn't like all the paraphernalia. So he would basically have his trilby hat on and have his script up to his eyes like that and read it like that, shaking like that. And Hancock sort of said, they're loving you. You know, he said, there's no jokes in this. There's no jokes in it. And he said, doesn't matter. It's funny. Somehow it's funny what you do. And gradually the script went down and the hat went back and he relaxed. And he always thanked Hancock for that. So Sid gave Hancock filming technique and Hancock gave Sid confidence with the material. So they go on. I mean, whatever you may think, and the end of their relationship is obviously clouded by what happens. But they were mates. They really were mates. And Sid went to his grave saying, you know, we could have made a fortune. We could have made films together and toured the world, and because they were a good team. But the first episode of Hancock, which wasn't Hancock's half hour, they cut it down to 25 minutes, and it's Hancock on his own. So this was after series 6 of Hancock's half hour. Sid James is now not involved in this anymore. He's doing another series that Galton and Simpson were writing called Citizen James. But this was called Hancock Alone, or The Bed Sitter as it's better known. And what Hancock wanted was to be on his own without Sid James. He thought Sid and him were becoming a double act. So Galton and Simpson, Ray Galton particularly, got a bit narked at this and said, right, son, if you want to be on your own, you'll be on your own. So he wrote this 25 minutes, or they wrote it together. Galton and Simpson wrote it together. There you go, son. It's 25 minutes. It's just you. So there's all sorts of stuff to unpick in there. I mean, where do you
start?
The very end, where he's reading Bertrand Russell and can't quite work out what the words are, so he picks up this Penny Dreadful, which is Lady Don't Fall Backwards, which I haven't shown you the missing page yet, but that's a callback to the year before's episode, The Missing Page. That's the book they both read in that, Lady Don't Fall Backwards by Darcy Sarto. But all the stuff with the impersonations are in there, the Maurice Chevalier stuff with the butter on his lip and all that. And all that business with Archie Andrews, the dummy, the wooden dummy. He was in Educating Archie.
Right.
Hancock had nightmares, you know, of that wooden doll, because it just, it got more laughs than he did, and it was just, you know, Peter Brough with his hand up the back of a wooden doll. But he literally seriously had sort of panic attacks about that wooden doll. So hence they wrote this whole thing about, you know, doing that business in it. And ironically and wonderfully, the year before that episode, or 1959, the year they did the 5th series of Hancock's Half Hour, Sid James had gone into Educating Archie. So it's almost like, oh, he's got one of my jobs again. He's gone into work with this puppet on radio, ventriloquist on radio. That's a genius as well. Peter Brough was the person behind Archie Andrews. So again, they're writing stuff that taps into what the public consciousness knows of Hancock, and it's a brilliant script. I think it's just a genius.
I think going back to what we were saying about being relatable and why people loved it, I found one of my favourite episodes. There's actually now building up to being quite a few, but one of them is the big night out, where they go to the laundrette, and you know, this was obviously all very modern technology,
yeah.
And I love the sort of, you know, setting the scene for that. You know, we're in a laundrette. There's
social history, isn't it?
Social
really
history is amazing.
But they never thought ahead of this. I'm sure. I mean, they weren't that, you know, had that prophetic that 50, 60, 70 years nearly later that would still be relatable. But all the stuff it's about football pools, it's about, you know, going down the shops, it's about going to the laundrette, it's about, you know, not having any money at the end of the week, it's about sort of just making ends meet. It's all the stuff we all go through. There's not, it's total satire, but it's everyday satire. So there's no references to politicians of the time. There's very few references to film stars, and if there are, they're people that you know. There's a gag in, it's the Blood Donor, which is one of the episodes he did on his own without Sid, where they reference how youthful Cliff Richard is, and, you know, that slow him down a bit. That's still funny. Yeah. 60 years on, because Cliff is still, you know,
Peter Pan,
exactly. So somehow they picked on somebody that would be relevant years after that show went out. It's
probably without thinking.
Of course, without thinking. But the comedy gods have been kind to that show somehow. It just seems so relevant. The only fact it's in black and white, and that's cool for me. But that's the only thing that dates it.
But I think also, you know, the one where they're on the cruise ship.
Beautiful episode.
I've forgotten the name of it.
It's just called The Cruise.
The Cruise, there we go. Yeah. And the fact that he's there in his big coat and his hat and his scarf and he's wrapped up in a blanket, you know, this is kind of how the British were abroad. You know, they went abroad and packed all their clothes, and, you know, between this season and this season, I always wear my outdoor coat. You know, and that's how it was very much in England.
Well, British rules the waves, you know. So what we do that should be. It's like that whole thing about well, I thought they're all speak English over here, the Spanish one.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That arrogance of the English abroad, that you think it's all going to be exactly the same as it is in, you know, Bayswater or something. Whereas Sid, of course, is the cool one. It's like, oh, he's playing, you know. Ball with the girls and whatever, and Hattie's in that one, of course, as well.
Well, that was my next thing I wanted to talk about, was the guest stars. And of course we've already said Kenneth Williams, Hattie
well, they weren't
Jacques.
with guest stars, they were part of the team, they were part of the radio team. So even when we're watching it now, Hattie and Kenneth were doing the radio shows. Actually, was Hattie still there? She was still there, wasn't she? No, she wasn't. She left by that point. Just left by that point. But Kenneth was still in them, certainly. And Hattie was Griselda Pugh. She was Hancock's secretary, and Sid's interest of love. Oh gosh, there was pash going on between Sid and Hattie on the radio shows. So when he sends her up on the cruise episode, that's a nice sort of reverse to what's going on radio. You see, but no, they were part of the team. So she was in quite a lot of series 2, I think that was, or was it series 3? Anyway, that series. Kenneth was in quite a lot as well, but they're the only ones that survive of each of their contributions.
And of course, then you've got your sort of regular team that were on the television, such as Hugh Lloyd, John Le Mesurier,
Hattie's husband.
Which is lovely to see.
So and one of my favourites, Mario
Mario
Brizzi, who I love, who's in the Forgotten Heroes of Comedy book. There's lots of familiar faces, but he liked those sort of repertory of actors, and it's interesting when he. Spoilers here, but we'll show you. He did move to ATV, he moved to commercial television after this first series of Hancock, the one we just saw. That series of 6. Galton and Simpson then started writing Steptoe Son, so Hancock went to commercial TV. But he would handpick certain actors who he had on the BBC shows, like Mario's in episode or 2, I think it's only 1. Patrick Cargill, who plays the doctor in The Blood Donor, is in the first episode, the shop assistant. So he liked to be surrounded by good actors. And this takes us to the film. I mean, I suppose, like a lot of those sitcoms, certainly the 70s sitcoms, they had film versions. The film version of Hancock's Half Hour, or the film version of Hancock, is The Rebel, which is a glorious, colour, epic. With proper film stars like George Sanders is in it, and Dennis Price, proper big names that Hancock worked with and loved. Gordon Simpson wrote the script for that too. So.
Well, let's just go back then and think about the sets, because there is that wonderful episode where it all goes terribly wrong.
Yeah, that was live, you see. So you mean the one with Dick Henry in it?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it was BBC, so it was a set and it was falling down. And
what was it? It was the house one, wasn't it?
It's the one he's trying to there's an airfield at the bottom of my garden.
That's it.
He's trying to flog the house. 23 railway cuttings. And because there's obviously a sound effect going on with these planes going by, imagine some sort of like big wind machine or something going on. Stuff's falling down and the table's falling and everything. But he's desperately, bless his heart, Hancock and Dick Henry is sort of fighting to keep this thing together. But they were old mates, you see. I mentioned they were both part of the Ralph Reeder gang shows. So he pops up in, what's the one he pops up in? Oh, the competition one is the postman, isn't he? Dick Henry's the postman, when he gets his hand stuck in the in the slot and all that, right? So they got on really well together. So yeah, but that was, it was live telly. I mean, I think people forget, this was quite a complex.
The wall when it didn't really.
Yeah, that's right.
Wasn't supposed to go straight through.
And there's certain things. I think the Economy Drive is a pre-recorded one, but there's moments that they would leave stuff in too, because it was quite cute. Like Peter Cook and Dudley Moore would crack up laughing, and that was pre-recorded, but they'd leave it in because it's part of it makes it appealing, really. Tim Brooke Taylor in the last 1948 show, that was recorded, but it looked like a sort of ramshackle sort of students' rag week sort of thing, and that was the appeal of it, I think. But with Hancock, it's the appeal. It's like two mates having a laugh, and when he opens the door in the Economy Drive and all that bread is piled up and it doesn't quite fall, and he sort of like hits it to make it fall. They're just nice little insights into the making of a TV show, which I just adore. That you're almost in the audience watching it happen, really. And
I also love, of course, our dear friend who, well, not our dear friend, but who plays his. And my mind's gone blank on her name. plays his like.
Pat Hayes.
Pat Hayes.
Oh, Patricia
Thank
Hayes.
you.
I know. I thought who was going to say Liz Fraser? No, Patricia Hayes. Oh, yeah, well, Richard O'Callaghan's mother. Yeah, absolutely brilliant character actress for many years standing. Yeah, she's Mrs. Gravatt, who's the sort of the landlady, not landlady, sort of home help, sort of cook.
Yeah, that's the word
cleaner,
I'm looking for.
all that, washerwoman, everything really that Hancock and Sid make her do. But yeah, she's great. Well, they did a series of commercials together for eggs in the mid-60s. Hancock and Patricia Hayes did a brilliant, very funny commercials for eggs.
And it was funny actually because we were also watching at the same time an episode of Heartbeat, which there is another YouTube film where we talk about Heartbeat. But
good commercial there. It is, yeah.
And she popped up, I think, like the day before, and then she popped up in Hancock. And
like 35 years difference,
but
isn't it?
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah,
and this got us talking about, it's such a shame that these poor actors went far too soon because they would have been in episodes.
Well,
of Heartbeat.
I think you said Harry H. Corbett would pop up in a Heartbeat, wouldn't he?
For sure,
perfectly, and he'd only been in his like sort of late 50s, early 60s, So
and Bill Maynard, of course, just making that connection.
Totally, yeah. You'd imagine Hancock popping up, couldn't you? Or Sid James popping up, But yeah, absolutely, and it's almost like it's watching those Heartbeats. We're digressing, but watching those Heartbeats, they're now 30 years ago. There's the same amount of time between that Hancock episode and Heartbeat as Heartbeat and now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it just seems ridiculous. When I was watching those in the early 90s, Hancock was 30 years old. That doesn't seem possible, really. Now it's 60 years old, or 60 plus years old. But that's that. But yeah, but the legacy of it is just incredible. And as you say, it seeps into every other sitcom pretty much.
And also the connection to the Carry On, which I will ask this question because it's something we get asked all the time when we do our Tuesday talk shows over on Facebook.
Yeah.
Why wasn't Hancock asked to play a character in a Carry On film? I know everybody wants to know.
They did. They asked him to do Sydney Bung in Carry On Screaming. Now, whether he was actually approached, it was certainly mentioned. It was certainly mentioned in talk because Sid James couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So they thought it's an ideal part for Tony Hancock. And when Hancock couldn't do it, I suppose the lateral thinking, Galton and Simpson, let's ask Harry H. Corbett, who Costello and Son was just about having a break then, wasn't it? Yeah, it's just about doing radio shows, but just about to do radio. But yeah, so they got Harry H. Corbett to do it. There's another film, and another lovely comedy horror film called What a Carve Up, which again is almost written like a Hancock's half-hour script.
Yeah,
Kenneth Connor plays Tony Hancock's part, pretty much. The sort of cowardice, and Sid's the sort of, all right, mate, come on, let's sort it out sort of thing. No sort of front to Sid at all. But that's almost a Hancock script as well, I think.
Yeah, even when they're in their flat at the beginning of that film.
Totally, you
could absolutely see.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he didn't do many films. I mean, as I say, he made only Orders Are Orders with Peter Sellers and Bill Fraser and Sid, Brian Reese and lots of good people. Then he went to TV. So I was doing TV at the time, but concentrate on television. Part of the reason why, and we'll pick this up with the when we do a Sid James film like this, probably. But that's part of the reason why the break really happened, because Sid was going off to do a million films, and all Tony had was the TV episodes. So he got quite miffed the fact that Sid's working with Burt Lancaster this week, for appease, and I'm concentrating on the episode, the weekly episode. But when the break happened, The Rebel, which I mentioned before, the one with George Sanders, about he's a terrible artist that becomes the toast of Paris. Galton and Simpson, who wrote the script, wanted to put Sid in that film as a little gag appearance. Now, there's a conflict of interest all sorts of ways there. There's also a slightly uncertainty what he was going to do. As far as I know, as far as Galton and Simpson, I think, told me that they changed their story a few times, but it was going to be there was a scene on a cruise liner going over to Paris or to France, to Cannes probably. Not Cannes, Calais, and Sid did a little gag appearance on that, and he fell into a swimming pool or pushed Hancock into a swimming pool or something. Anyway, Hancock said, "Tell that, no, I'm not having that. I'm not having Sid in this. This is my film." You know, I'm not having him in this one as well. It's not fair. So he wasn't in it. And Liz Fraser was in it very quickly, and at the same time was doing a film with Sid called Double Bunk. And she knew them both really well as good mates, and she told me that Sid was mortified and really hurt that Hancock dropped him. And as I said earlier, he had this idea that they could do films together and all that, which never happened. But he went on to do a really quite serious film. It's a comedy film, but it's quite poignant. It's a bit sort of Jacques Tati, really, Punch and Judy man. The Rebel was in colour, beautiful sort of international appeal, big star names. The Punch and Judy Man was in black and white. Lots of British character actors, none the worse for that. Sylvia Sims, I showed you The Big Job the other day, who's in that, and a lot of people from the TV show. Hugh Lloyd's in it, Mario Fabrizi's in it, John Lemaire's in it, Hattie's in it, very briefly as the fortune teller. And it's a very British centric film, which completely went against all his ambitions. And he would talk to film magazines saying, "I want to break it into the American market. I want to be an international comedian on film." He did this film, which, although it was a brilliant film, didn't do well at the box office. And then that was it, really. So he started spiralling down. He drank too much. He overanalyzed the scripts. He dropped Galton and Simpson by that point. So he had nobody left. And Spy Milligan would say, you know, the problem with Tony, everybody loved Tony apart from himself. And he had this great gang of people, and he gradually cut away Kenneth Williams and cut away Hattie, cut away Sid James, which is probably the biggest mistake he ever made, really. Although I can see why he did it, we'll come back to that. And then he finally, the biggest mistake, forget that, the biggest mistake was Galton and Simpson, to lose the writers that just knew him so well and wrote for him so brilliantly well. So he came away, but on the Sid James point, watching the episodes now, you can understand him getting a bit miffed, really, because Sid gets a lot of the laughs, doesn't he?
Yeah,
and he's the cooler character. You know, he's got all the girls, and he's smartly dressed, and he's got all the chat. And Hancock's the fall guy, and it really does become like the Hancock and Sid show.
Yes,
it's called Hancock's Half Hour still, but Sid gets equal screen time, doesn't he? And you think, if that was my show, I'd be getting a little bit miffed myself probably, because this guy's getting all the laughs, or a lot of the laughs, and I'm only getting laughs by being stupid, you know.
Well, I know that actually the time that we're filming this is, we've just finished actually Mental Health Week, and I think it's important to maybe talk about this, because I know you do a show where you talk about various stars. It's called A Comedy of Madness, and I know it's a project you worked on with Robert J. Simpson, who's also a real advocate for looking into mental health issues.
I love that show. It's a very beautiful and hopefully thought-provoking show. We tackled Marty Feldman and Peter Sellers and Robin Williams and lots of other comedians that suffered, like Milligan, Sellers, and Hancock particularly. Yeah.
So it seems quite apt for us to talk about a clip that I know you're very.
Oh gosh, you're going to say I might lose it. Well, yeah, this is important clip. I mean, I do show this clip in if we ever get back to theatres, which we are now. I know things are slowly happening again. This is dating it, but you can watch this in 20 years' time, and it'll be funny, hopefully, or informative. Yeah, this is from an interview show called Face to Face. Now, to put this into context, he hadn't shot this interview when we were watching these episodes. So at the end, so we got one more to watch. This is between you and me here. And this is the series when Hancock's thinking, I can do without Sid. Sid is getting too many laughs here. I like him as a person. I don't want to work with him as a double act as he saw it becoming. So he was telling friends at this point, I want to move on. He made one more series with Sid, which is brilliant. But before he made that series, the 6th series of Hancock's Half Hour, and the last time he worked regularly with Sid, he did work with him later, but on television regularly, he did this interview with John Freeman. As you'll see, it's you know the show. It's notorious and celebrated for all sorts of reasons. It's very close up on the face. Mm-hmm. And John Freeman, the interviewer, is in shadows, like an inquisitor, like an what's the word I'm after? Interrogator. And Hancock is smoking, and you can see, and I think what's the phrase that John Freeman uses? I think something's eating you. You can see something's eating at you now. You know, you're the angst man. He calls him the angst man. So let's watch this clip, and just this is basically at a time when Tony Hancock is about to do the dirty on Sid, and he's trying to move on. So let's just watch the clip and yeah.
Okay. Facing an individual performance, do you actually enjoy it, or is it hell while you're doing it?
No, it's a bit of hell just before it starts. There's a lot of, champing around and trying to get an edge, a right edge, so that you are relaxed, but also have a kick, so that you are going to be alive and also relaxed. It needs a great deal of concentration and hold upon yourself to do this. Sometimes it's a little too quick to really enjoy, I think, but there you are. It's very challenging. It is enjoyable as a whole. But, there's too much immediate concentration to really. You can't really completely say, oh well, we can have a bit of a ball, you know.
Looking back on your first 35 years, jolly straight question: are you happy or not?
I've been very fortunate. I think I have everything that that anybody could want to make them happy. But wait a minute, I haven't finished it. I was going to say that the only happiness I could achieve would be to perfect the talent that I have, whatever it may be, however small it may be. That is the whole purpose of it, and that is the whole purpose of what I do.
Some of the newspaper writers who've tried to puzzle out what makes you tick have said that you're the angst man, the anxiety man. Now, have you any notion of what your anxiety is? Do you, in fact, get a kick out of your anxiety?
How do you think anxiety? Would you explain it a bit more?
Well, something appears to me, even at the end of this conversation, to be eating you. You say that your happiness is just ahead of you still. There's something troubling you about the world. I'd like to know what it is.
I wouldn't expect happiness. I don't think that's possible. But I'm very fortunate to be able to work in something that I like. I think to have to work in something that is pleasure is all anybody can ask.
You wouldn't then change your way of life at all?
I'd try and improve it, yes.
Well, improve it, but you'd go on in the same way, getting better at what you're doing.
Yes, and if such a time came that I found that I'd come to the end of what I could develop out of my own ability, or limited however it may be, then I wouldn't want to do it anymore.
Tony Hancock, I wonder if you really get very much out of your triumphs. You've got cars that you don't drive. You've got health, which you tell me is a bit ropey because you find you find it so difficult to learn your lines. You've got money that you can't really spend. You worry about your weight.
I spend the money. I do. I enjoy it.
Well, what I want to put to you as a final question is this: you could stop all this tomorrow if you wanted to. You're rich enough to coast along for the rest of your days. Now,
money is of no account in this.
Well, tell me why you go on.
Because
tell me why you go on as a last answer.
Because it absolutely fascinates me, because I love it, and because it is my entire life.
I get really emotional.
I know, it sets you off, that clip.
Because it genuinely does. Because you see, you see a person who is struggling with himself and struggling with who he thinks the public see him as. But more important than that, than anything else that beats the money and beats the women or beats the fame, it's comedy. He lives for comedy. And that point when he just says, you know, it's my entire life. It really is. It gets me. And it was his entire life, you know. Anyway. Yeah.
I think it's I think the clip is very important for people to see, because I think, especially now in this modern age where we think about these big stars and we think that they have it all, and especially now where everybody is desperate to be a social media star and have you know, it used to be the 15 minutes of fame, but it's not even that anymore. It's just you want to have you want to be an influencer. But I think it's so crucial to know that there is a flip side to this, and you know, this is someone who, as a nation, everybody loved and embraced, but also went through their own traumas and struggles, but also a poignant message of comedy really is something that is important in our lives. It's the thing that keeps us going, and I think that's a even very fundamental British thing, is that, you know, we do like our black humour, and we do laugh at things.
Totally. Oh yeah, death is funny, and funerals are funny, and you know, and all that, and I think it's really intrinsic to Hancock's comedy is the downbeat, the fact that, you know, he's struggling and he's not getting the breaks in terms of his acting career and all that, and it's funny, but because you laugh at him, but you love him too. And I think, you know, that interview certainly highlights that. And I mean, I know his brother Roger Hancock, who was his agent as well for a time. his manager, pinpointed that as the point. Although Hancock and John Freeman were very good friends, and Hancock actually loved it. He thought it was a really important piece of documentation of the inner workings of his mind of comedy, And it's an amazing piece to watch. I get very emotional about it, but because you know how it ends, basically, which is the sad bit, But if it had been a point where he wouldn't still be with us. Well, he could be, but I mean, he'd be very old now. He'd be 97, wouldn't he? But he could have lived on for another 20, 30 years after he died, quite happily, doing big American films or doing, spectaculars in England or whatever. And there were all sorts of plans. And you know what happens, don't you? Do you know what happened to Tony? I'm assuming you do, but I mean, maybe you don't.
I think I know, but go on.
No,
tell our viewers.
Well, they'll know. They'll know. He committed suicide. So 8 years after that interview, which doesn't seem very long, and 7 years after The Blood Donor went out, which doesn't seem very long, which is the most important thing I suppose the most best loved episode he did. But in between that highlight and that low point were lots of sort of false starts and not very successful TV shows. And I mentioned before the Royal Festival Hall thing, which was a disaster. You could, because the cameras, because you could see the beads of sweat, and he was struggling, and he was carrying a lot of weight, and he said I looked like an effing frog was what he said at the time, and he wasn't in a good place, and he was drinking too much, like his big hero Sid Field, who one of my great comedy heroes, one of the last I never saw on stage, or died in the 50s, but died in 1950. But what's left of his work, Hancock loved him, and you can see why he loved Sid Field, because he was this working class comic who would talk to the audience, but got to the point when he couldn't even go on without a drink, and I think Hancock got to that point. The last reunion with Sid was quite lovely. Well, not lovely, but interesting. 1965, they recorded an audio for long-playing record for Decca, I think it was, Decca Records. The Missing Page episode, which was a TV episode. So 5 years after they did it on telly, they did it as an audio vinyl record release. And there's a few pictures, and Sid is obviously doing the carry-ons at that point. So Sid, 1965 sort of carry-on cowboy sort of area, looking great, looking fit, and he's laughing, and there's Hancock looking really sort of not well at all, looking grey, he looks not well at all. And it went down and down. He did a film that year, The Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines, Those Magnificent Men, which was a cough and a spit, as again, a right Charlie that is flying backwards instead of flying forwards over to France. And then in 1966, he did a film called for Brian Forbes called The Wrong Box, which is a brilliant film. John Mills and Ralph Richardson, Michael Caine, Pete and Dud. Hancock comes in the last 5 minutes of the detective and pretty much steals it. I love him. He's so good. And who are you, sir? And who are you, sir? To everybody, and he's brilliant. But it was a cough and a spit. It was 2 days work. And then there was an offer from Walt Disney to do a film called The Adventures of Bullwhip Griffin. And ironically, Robert Newton, who Hancock impersonated so brilliantly all the time, who was a complete alcoholic and gloriously made a career out of it pretty much, he did Treasure Island for Walt Disney. Hancock apparently lost this film because he was drinking too much, and they replaced him with an actor called Richard Haydn. And that actually wasn't a huge success of a film anyway, but it would have been quite cool to be in a Disney film and get a bit of American marquee value. And then he got an offer to do this Australian show, and went over to do that, which, so the thing was 3 day shot, survives, and then they're all right. They're quite funny. They're very Hancock. They're very sort of dour and sort of Bocca miseria, as you would say with an Italian phrase, for a bit miserable. And then in colour, but that was it. And he left a note. He took too many pills and drank too much alcohol, and left a note saying things go wrong too many times, and that was it. But there was there's the codicil to that, and we should wrap up before I start blubbering again. It's stupid because I never knew him. It's ridiculous, but he's someone that affected me so much as a kid watching his shows, and I genuinely love him. I love him. I think he just makes me feel happy, and the sad thing is that he wasn't happy himself, and
What would you say then to round off? What would you say?
Well, I was going to. There was a thing. We'll come back to something favourite. There's a couple of sad things, and then you can ask me that. Sorry, I'm interviewing you. Alan Simpson told me that he got a phone call from Tony. You know, it was like sort of 3 a.m. UK time, so it would have been about 3 PM over there, wouldn't it? All that sort of time, and he was completely paralytic, and he was nonsensical. And Alan said, "Oh, Tony, I'll call you later. I'll call you back later." And what the gist of it was, I'm going to swear here, but it doesn't work without swear. Hancock said to Alan, he said, "Look, I've got a great idea. When I get back from Australia, get Ray, the 3 of us, sit us down. I've got an idea, and we'll knock their fucking eyes out," was what he said. And Alan said, "Oh yeah, all right, Tony, all right. Well, we'll call you. I'll call you when you get back," sort of thing. And that was it. Last time we heard from him. So what that idea was, it might have been dreadful. I don't know. It might have been a drunk man's sort of nonsense. We will never know. That is the thing. We will never know. But I like to think that Hancock went out with a positive thought that he had something to give. And there's the famous story which I often tell on my shows, my tour, The Forgotten Hills of Comedy, because Hancock links back to lots of people. I mentioned Sid Field, who was one of them. He was a brilliant stage comic. But there's a story of a person that goes to a psychiatrist and just says, he says, my life is in ruins. My wife is leaving me. My children don't talk to me. I have no friends left. I'm turning to alcohol. I don't know what to do. Life is not worth living anymore. And this psychiatrist says, "Well, my friend, go across the theatre, the Grok the clown. He makes everybody happy. He's performing tonight. Go and see Grok." And the guy said, "But doctor, I am Grok." So where's the comic go? Where's the funny man go to get the relief? And that's the story of a lot of them. And Hancock is the definitive example of that, really.
Yes,
But,
so what would be then your favourite episode?
Thank you. It's supposed to be a comedy show. Thank you. Oh gosh. Well, my favourite episode because radio, I love a lot of the radio. Wild Man in the Woods, I love on radio, and The Last Bus Home. It's the bus. That's Bill's line. But I think probably my favourite episode of television, Hancock's Half Hour, or Hancock, or anything that he did on TV, is probably my favourite episode of any television, which is quite a big statement, but I think it's got to be The Missing Page, which is just such a beautifully crafted. And because I had the record, I had the vinyl from 1965, it's almost I can almost recite the whole half hour. It's in my head, that script. Put that pen down, I know you're in there, and all that, and it's just it's about books, which obviously is my other passion after comedy is books, and it's such a clever, if you're a fan of sort of detective fiction and Agatha Christie's and all that, it's brilliant, and the interplay between Sid and Hancock is just so delicious. And I suppose in a way you also know it's about to end too, and Sid doesn't know, and Hancock has got this sort of idea. It's not a plan, that sounds too calculated. He's got a wish to move on. Yeah. But you can see them having a great time, and it's just brilliant. So that's the one I go to, which we're coming to. I hope you might hate it, and then you're being kicked out. But it's just perfect. It's just perfectly written. And Hugh Lloyd is the librarian. Anything with Hugh Lloyd in, we love, don't we? I love Hugh Lloyd.
He's amazing.
Another forgotten hero of mine in the book. But
I think that we'll round off there. So thank you everybody for listening and hopefully staying with us for this hopefully half hour.
It won't be longer than half an hour. It's Hancock's hour and a half. Hancock's hour and a half.
There is also the Tony Hancock Appreciation Society, which the link will be below, and I'll probably put something up here that should be on your screen. Support them, because they've kept the lad alive in the memories for many years, and they do brilliant work, and they're passionate, as am I. I'm far more informed than I am about Tony and his work, but yeah. And we will be back with some more of Robert Ross's comedy greats. I don't know who we'd like to see next. Ask us, and we'll do a film. Make some suggestions, but we'll do these on an irregular basis, won't we? But Gemma, thank you for asking such pertinent questions and for mopping my tears away when it got a bit emotional. But it's been a joyous thing, and I'm so glad you like him.
because yeah, he's the business, isn't he?
He is.
Yeah.
No, I'm enjoying them. I'm enjoying them.
Okay, gorgeous.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye bye.